Greetings to those of you who are tuning in, either audio or video on the YouTube channel. Thanks for being a part of us in that way. I'm so grateful to be here as I am each morning, but what a glorious morning it is here in the summer of 2024 on Magic Mountain, Warrensville, Pennsylvania. Some of you are familiar with the chapel service more or less, and one of the ways we organize the service is a theme for each particular Sunday in rotation. This day's theme is hope, and I have, as I always say, I'm not exactly sure how this message is going to come out, but I know where I want to start. I'll say that. And where I want to start is a story that comes from my personal life. And so I was a Catholic child and in a very Catholic family, and one of the things in Catholicism is the identification at baptism of godparents. And so I think as an infant, I could go back. I have my baptismal certificate from my mom. I know exactly where it is. I didn't think to look at it this week, but I could have figured out what age it was. But I was an infant when a gentleman named Wade and his wife Pauline were identified as my godparents. And the thing is, by the time I was age 4, my family moved overseas. And so I'm sure Wade was at my baptism. I do not remember my baptism. And I'm sure that I probably saw him a few times until we moved overseas. But I didn't reconnect with my godfather, even though I was told of his existence. And one of the things I was told, which is in that tradition, like, hey, if something tragic were ever to happen, Jack, and you were in desperate need, Wade is the person that you would want to reach out to. Like if your parents were to die or whatever, that was part of the tradition, was that these persons were there as a sort of a surrogate in need when it happened. So that was an interesting concept. It had some bearing on me. And when I was 18 years old, so much to say about this story, but anyway, I ended up in San Francisco, and I knew that this was where Wade and Pauline at that time lived, and I had asked my parents, at that time still living, hey, I wonder how it would be if I asked Wade and Pauline to host me in San Francisco. And my mom and dad arranged it, so I ended up in San Francisco on this whirlwind set of travels I was doing as an 18-year-old. And when I got to their apartment in San Francisco, my godfather said, hey, would you like something to drink? Now at that time, 18 was the typical sort of drinking age, so it was not that sort of a stretch. And I was like, oh, awesome, yeah, definitely. Then I watched him go into the kitchen and open the under the sink cabinet, which is where I keep Drano. And he pulled out this one bottle. It probably had dust on it. Now when you hear the whole story, you'll understand why I say that. And I could hear the familiar crack of the metal collar, and which is all stuff, and I guess he had tonic, so he made me either vodka tonic or gin and tonic. I don't remember which one, but I just knew I was getting the elixir that I was already full-blown addicted, and I was so addicted that in those travels I had been in the Far East, and I had smuggled drugs into China and the Philippines and Hong Kong like crazy, stupid, and here I was back in the United States turf, and I had no clue about the story I'm about to tell you. I was completely clueless. I was like, awesome, I can drink in this place. So I had maybe one, probably second drink, probably third drink. I don't know if I even noticed he wasn't drinking with me, but and the next day, the apartment was right near Union Square Park, as you know, San Francisco would know, and in 1978, Union Square was the place to buy drugs on the street. So I went out and I bought weed. I don't know if I bought cocaine, but I was a cocaine, marijuana, and alcohol. That was my mainstay substances, and I would take anything pretty much that you had. And so anyway, I spent a couple of weeks with them, and when I was getting ready to leave my stay with my godfather, I really liked them. They seemed nice. I had other stuff to do. But my godfather said, hey, can I take you out to lunch? Wednesday, you're leaving Thursday. I was like, sure. And I remember, I think I have this right, I didn't do the research to check, but I think we took the Tiburon ferry out to a little island in the San Francisco Bay. And we had this, I remember it was a cool, beautiful place. We were sitting on this deck overlooking, there was Alcatraz up in the, distance in the Golden Gate Bridge, and it was picturesque. And my godfather sat me down, and I remember this conversation in fairly significant detail, because I think I was like, what? But one of the things he asked me, he said, Jack, do you think you have a problem with drinking? And I remember saying, no, and he So then he went on to tell me that he was abstinent from alcohol, that he had been for a very long time, and that it was a big, huge part of his life, and that he was involved with other people. He had a person, so he had a sponsor, now I know the lingo, and also he was sponsoring a very famous person. I'm not going to violate the traditions by telling him, but he told me, I'm wondering why he did tell me. Years later, this very famous person would write a memoir, did not in the memoir mention my godfather, but my godfather told me that he was sponsoring this very famous person, in essence. And and the very end of the conversation, I remember him saying, Jack, if you ever think you have a problem, I can be the godfather to you in that. Like, I would be happy to help you out. So I'm like, awesome, thanks, great, nice lunch, Can't wait to get back to the bar. And it did not at all sink in some sort of transformational way, but it sunk in as a heads up. It was like the first piece of radar that I had in my life about people in addiction recovery. I knew nothing about it. So 10 years later, I commenced my own sobriety, and it was an unflattering 10 years. I finished college. I was fairly, there was a lot that didn't derail in my life, but there was. I don't need to tell the whole story. Anyway, I ended up in Narcotics Anonymous and then in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I'm successfully not drinking one day at a time. And in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, my godfather was like an early influence in this. And there were several other people that were data points that made me know that, people do get sober. And then here I was getting sober myself, and I kept thinking, I had this tug, like I should touch base with him and let him know that I was in AA. I waited, because here's the thing, I know now, and I remember thinking about it as I eventually wrote him, that I was afraid I wouldn't stay sober. I didn't want to write him a letter saying, hey, I just celebrated a year, and then get drunk again. And I had this perfectionism thing about me, which now is completely gone, not really. But, so I was coming up on my 3rd anniversary, and I was actually working my way through AA's 12 steps. And there's a step in there, which is a tricky one for a lot of people, which is the 9th step, where we make amends to people we had harmed. And Wade ended up on my list of people I had harmed because of my embarrassment about the knuckleheaded idiot that was insensitive and not empathic on that summer when I spent 2 weeks in his home, and I was probably tanked the whole time. So I wrote him a 3-page handwritten letter. Dear Wade, thank you so much for being the person in my life that my parents asked you to be. I feel so awful about how I conducted myself as an 18-year-old, and I'm so excited to tell you that if I can make it on January 3rd, I will mark 3 years of sobriety in AA. Various other things about the letter, finished college, I always knew you were there, sorry I didn't stay more connected, and I sent the letter off. There's different ways to make amends and all that sort of stuff. Now, the other thing I have not shared with you is that between 1978 and 1989, in my early sobriety, so 1992, yeah, sorry, I got the dates wrong. Anyway, between the time of his hospitality to me and my sending him the letter, he had been diagnosed with Lou Gehrig's disease, and he would live an insanely long amount of time with Gehrig's disease, but what it started to do was affect his capacity to move around and to communicate, and it's a paralyzing illness. It's a cruelly debilitating illness. And I remember the reason I was sort of tracking it was that he and my mom had a powerful connection after my dad died. He would send my mom cards, and it went from letters to cards. Hey, and he called my mom Reenie. Her name was Irene. Hey, Reenie, just checking in on you. And I remember seeing those cards on the table of my mom's home, and you knew they were Wade cards because they were a very primitive looking handwriting, but it was him forcing himself to write even though he was losing the capacity to control his dominant hand. And so then and my mom would say, do you want to read the card from Wade? And I would read it, and it would be, hi Reenie, my love and prayers are with you. And things about Michael's doing okay. It turned out his son Michael became a person in Alcoholics Anonymous too, and over the course of Wade's illness, Michael took care of his dad until the end of his life. There's beautiful things that happen in these recovery families, by the way. So anyway, it's December 27th, 28th, 29th, I'm coming up on my 3rd year anniversary. I go in and grab my mail, and there in my mail is a Wade card. And I was like, I knew, you knew it was, because it was the same kind of card with the same terribly impaired handwriting. And I was like, oh my God. And when I opened the card from Wade, out dropped, this is not the actual one. Oh, I just had one. Oh, here it is. Out dropped one of these. This is a recovery medallion. And I looked at it, because I knew what they were. I was waiting to get mine, which would have a Roman numeral 3 on it. And my godfather's 37-year medallion was in this card. He had written like, thank you for writing, no amends necessary, I hope this is meaningful for you. 37 years. Now if you do the math from 1992 back, that means that he got sober in 1955. Alcoholics Anonymous starts in 1935. So he was one of the first 20 years of people in recovery. That is like, excuse me for any badass. Like that's like touch with greatness. So and I stand in a legacy of an amazing sort of thing. This man was in my life, and he was an early 12-step influence on me. I have to give him credit for my sobriety to some degree, because that conversation in the San Francisco Bay never left my mind, and it caused me to watch myself going down the drain, knowing that it was not necessary, that I didn't have to be the person who was in prison like that. So, great story, I think. Hope, right? He was an element of hope for me as hope began to erode, because being an addict is a really tough ride. And those of you who are here as loved ones of people who are addicted, I think you know that, but also it's really hard if you love somebody who's an addict, because it's really easy to get mad at them and think, gosh, you knucklehead, why are you doing this to us, right? And so the combination of the blame that comes at us from our inability to pull ourselves out of this tailspin, and the combination of the hurt that the loved ones experience is miserable and despairing. I had a person in my life who once told me, sometimes people have these influences on our lives, and I happen to be a person who really has held on to various moments when people say things or do things for me. I don't know if you're that way, but anyway, I had a mentor in seminary who said to me, I went to him because somebody in my life was suffering terribly from depression. And I love this man so much. Doug Meeks, a seminary professor who helped me so much. And I went to him because he was the dean of the seminary I was in, and I trusted him. So I shared with him what was going on in my life, and he said to me, Jack, I don't know anything about depression. I'm not a mental health practitioner, but I know theology. And I think what you're talking about is despair. And in my mind, as a theologian, I would tell you that hope is the antidote to despair. I've never forgotten that. I think that's like a really powerful teaching. And so there are people, you're here at Caron, which means something has really sucked lately. Invariably, or you came with friends, right? So I don't know why you're here, but this might be your Wade Davenport moment. So the discovery of the pain and the awareness that there is a path forward out of the darkness and into the light is what began to happen for me. And now, having at that time really rejected any ideas of faith or God when I first began my sobriety, I think back like that moment with my godfather out in the San Francisco Bay. I cannot dismiss it. And yes, it came from a familiar relationship and from love, but also as like an early intervention by, as we talk about in the recovery rooms, a power greater than myself that today I realize was like an early nudge. What would have happened had I taken his invitation on that day? It's hard to imagine, and that's how our lives are. We always have this, what if I had taken another turn? What would have unfolded? So anyway, I have a couple other things I wanted to talk about. I'm going to skip a whole category of it, but one of the other hope handholds that I love is a poem that will be read later by Emily Dickinson. And I don't know if you know it, but it's an interesting poem. 1861, it's said that she wrote this. She was a person who was described as pretty much of a recluse in the town of Amherst, Massachusetts. And in 1861, the Civil War is beginning. But in 1861, this is when pestilence and plagues and viruses and bacterial infections take out tons of people. So there is speculation. One of the things that happens is between 1858 and to the end of the Civil War, she was very prolific. She wrote tons of poems, and she was not publishing them. What happened is after her death, her sister Lavinia found more than 1,000 poems, something like 1,800 poems, and began to release them for public awareness. And today, we know of Emily Dickinson as this amazing writer. She was very educated, she was very intelligent, and these poems are so beautiful. Anyway, Emily Dickinson, as the Civil War is beginning in this town of Amherst, where already her life has been beset by various deaths and calamities, and now she's watching people she loved go off to serve in a war where the outcomes are not great for many people. And in Civil War, think about that's ripping the fabric of your social understanding of what the world that you live in is like. And very Yankee, but so she writes this poem in which she portrays hope with this simple metaphor as a bird. Hope is a bird. And it sings a tune without words, and it never stops at all. So this morning, 5 a.m., I'm awake with my wife down in southern Delaware, and I always come back here from southern Delaware for preaching. And it's still very early when the light comes up. And we have these birds, they're well nigh annoying. Because they, and this is my imagination, is that Emily Dickinson is closeted in some room, and the speculation that she suffered from despair, if not depression, and probably depression, right? Because all these horrible things were happening, and she had difficulty coming out into the world, and then the world was crumbling and all this sort of stuff, and then there's some bird, and so she writes this beautiful poem. And I want to be that bird today. I want to sing a song of annoying hope. If you are in this place where you're like, I hate Caron, this is terrible, I don't want to be here, it's not going to work. If you're the Eeyore in the room, I'm the Tigger, Taylor, wonderful things. And I just want to tell you, I don't buy your misery story. I don't buy it. I have watched people who are persuaded of the impossibility of the recovery, whether as family members or as people who have been in recovery and found themselves returning to use or whatever, and I'll never get my sobriety back, or people who are I'll never be able to stop, or the gambler, or the whatever, or we're in this horrible situation, and it's the sky is falling, Chicken Little kind of despair. And if that is at your door, that's what this place has been made. The chapel service was brought into being by that crazy priest over there depicted on the wall to just mess with you. Because I can feel him being here and saying, this is a place where families come back together. And this is a place where hope will refuse to be quiet. This is a place where lives are transformed, and this is a place where recovery begins or resumes, and this is a place where families begin to hear a message that what I always wanted, I feel so regretting, I am so ashamed, to some degree I will say ashamed, I'm so sad and feel so much guilt about the harm that was caused by me and my active addiction, and some of it in my sobriety, by the way. I've been a pretty, the recovery journey takes a long time, and there are layers of increasing awareness because we blunder a lot while we're still not drinking. I did anyway. And so, but what I do want people to know is that I never woke up and thought, I'm going to screw up my mom's life. I'm going to make my wife, feel like she's completely, there was never an ounce of intention to bring the harm that came. What there was an incapacity to act to intercept my own behavior. This is the nature of addiction as disease. And today we have all the brain science to support it. We have all kinds of evidence. And this place, if you don't believe addiction is disease, hang out here for a while and meet these highly effective, professional, qualified, uber competent people who are completely incapable of wrestling this particular demon to the ground. Captains of industry, leaders of enterprises, graduates of the most distinguished institutions who just like cocaine, just like has them by the throat. And they're like, I'm just going to be a social crack user. You know, like the insanity of it is it. So let me bring it back home. I have this prayer that came to me this morning, which is that in less than 3 years, what did I do with it? I will get a 37-year medallion, and that there will be a person for me to send that to in a card. Won't that be awesome? Yes. It is possible.